The bobcat stood in the gas station lot at dawn for so long that Nina Flores noticed it before she noticed the coffee was burning, and by the time she finally stepped out from behind the register to see why a wildcat was staring at the sidewall near the ice machine, the scratching sound behind the compressor had turned from a nuisance into the reason a child made it home alive. The station sat at the edge of Highway 17, just outside the town of Dry Creek, where the road widened briefly for a turn lane, a diner, and a truck stop sign that glowed all night even when half the letters flickered. It was called Miller's Fuel and Market, though nobody under 60 called it that. To everyone else, it was just Miller's, the place where ranch hands grabbed coffee before daylight, long-haul drivers topped off and bought sunflower seeds, and locals stopped for milk, bait, or a hot dog they had no business trusting after midnight. The building was squat and aging, with a flat roof, bright white canopy lights, and an old outdoor ice machine bolted to the side wall near the propane cage. In summer, the machine rattled and hummed like it was working itself to death. In winter, it froze up and had to be kicked. In every season, it made noises nobody bothered to investigate unless it stopped making ice. Nina Flores had worked the dawn shift for almost 9 years and knew every one of those noises. She was 34, quick-moving, sharp-eyed, and practical to the bone. A single mother who could count a till, mop a spill, restock windshield fluid, and de-escalate a drunk argument before most people had finished their first yawn. She started at 4:30 every morning, unlock alarm, start coffee, flip the breakfast warmer, check pumps, and brace for the regulars. Earl with his scratch-offs, the school bus mechanic with 2 cinnamon rolls, and the deputy who always said he was cutting back on energy drinks while buying 3. That morning dawn came slow and pale after a windy night. Dust had blown across the highway, and a cold front had dropped the temperature just enough to make breath visible in the canopy lights. Nina was alone until the 6 o'clock overlap, moving through the routine with one ear on the police scanner app and the other on the industrial rhythm of the place. Cooler fans, soda machine fizz, coffee brewer hiss, the deep intermittent clunk from the outdoor ice unit cycling on and off. At 5:18, while she was pouring fresh coffee into the front urn, she glanced through the glass doors and stopped. A bobcat stood near pump 3. It wasn't running across the lot, not darting through the shadows the way wildlife sometimes did at the edge of town. It was standing still in the middle of the empty dawn-lit concrete, ears up, body angled toward the side wall of the building where the ice machine sat. It looked lean and adult, tawny coat spotted along the legs and flanks, black ear tufts sharp against the bluish light. The animal's breath steamed faintly in front of its face. Nina set the coffee pot down too hard and sloshed it onto the counter. "Okay," she muttered. "Nope." She stared another second, waiting for it to bolt. It didn't. It took a few steps toward the side wall, stopped near the ice machine, and looked back toward the doors. Then it turned its head and stared at the machine again. Nina's first thought was simple: rabid. Her second thought, just as quick: maybe not. The bobcat wasn't staggering or snarling. It wasn't acting disoriented. It looked tense, alert, and very focused on something specific. She reached automatically for the cordless phone and called out toward the back room, even though she knew nobody was there yet. "Luis?" Silence. Right. Alone. The bobcat paced a short line between the air pump and the ice machine, then stopped again. It made a rough, rasping sound that Nina felt through the glass more than heard. The hair on her arms lifted. Then she heard it, a faint scratching, not from outside in general, from the wall area near the ice machine. Nina froze, coffee forgotten. The ice machine always rattled. The compressor always hummed. But this was different, irregular, frantic, scraping. She moved closer to the door, straining to listen. The scratching came again, followed by a small dull thump from behind the machine housing. "Something stuck back there," she whispered. The bobcat looked sharply toward the sound, then back at the doors. It paced once, twice, and stood still, eyes fixed on Nina. That did it. Nina grabbed the long-handled broom from beside the mop sink, not because she thought it would help much against a wildcat, but because empty hands felt stupid, then hit the lock release and opened one door just enough to step out. The cold air bit at her face. "Hey," she said, voice shaky but firm. "Get out of here." The bobcat backed away 6 feet, no more, and stopped. It didn't run. It watched her. Nina moved along the wall slowly, keeping the broom in front of her. The ice machine sat on a concrete pad, wedged between the wall and a metal trash enclosure, with just enough space behind it for leaves, wrappers, and trouble to collect. The compressor was running, rattling the side panels. Underneath that vibration, the scratching came again. Faster now, and then a small voice. "Help?" Nina's stomach dropped. She dropped the broom and lunged to the corner, crouching to peer into the narrow gap behind the machine. At first, she could see only darkness, coils, and wind-blown debris. Then a sneaker. Pink. Small. Wedged behind the back panel and the wall. "Oh my God!" She flattened herself and looked harder. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, was crammed in the gap behind the ice machine, one leg twisted awkwardly under her, jacket dirty, cheeks streaked with tears and dust. Her hands were red and scraped raw from trying to claw at the metal panel. She was shivering so hard her teeth clicked. "Don't move, baby! Don't move!" Nina said instantly, her voice changing into the calm she used when her own son used to wake from nightmares. "I see you. I'm right here." The child blinked at her, eyes swollen from crying. "It's stuck," she whispered. Nina looked at the gap and understood. The machine sat closer to the wall than it should have, probably shifted over time, or when the last delivery truck bumped the curb. A child could squeeze in from the side if she crawled after something, or hid, and then panic and wedge herself deeper trying to get back out. The back support strut and conduit line left almost no room. "How long have you been there?" Nina asked, already reaching for her phone. The girl's lower lip trembled. "Since dark." Nina went cold all over. She dialed 911 with her thumb and spoke fast, clear, and loud enough to be heard over the compressor. "Dry Creek Dispatch. This is Nina at Miller's Fuel on Highway 17. I've got a child trapped behind the outdoor ice machine, conscious, cold, possible leg injury. Send EMS, and fire now." The dispatcher came on immediately. "Copy, Miller's Fuel. Child trapped behind exterior ice machine. Is the child breathing normally?" "Yes, breathing, crying, responsive. She's cold and wedged tight. I can't pull her from this angle. Do not force extraction. Units are en route. Keep the child calm and monitor breathing." The bobcat was still there. Nina looked up mid-call and saw it standing near the edge of the lot, body angled toward the machine, ears forward, watching every movement. Not approaching, not leaving. The dispatcher was still asking questions, but Nina's thoughts were racing. Why would a child be here all night? Where were her parents? How had no one heard her? Then she remembered the wind, the overnight trucks, the compressor noise, and the fact that the side wall was out of sight from the road unless you walked around the building. "Ma'am?" the dispatcher prompted. "Sorry, yes, she's awake, shivering. Says she's been here since dark." Nina swallowed hard. "And there's a bobcat in the lot." A pause. "There is a what?" "A bobcat. It was standing here looking at the machine. That's how I checked." Another pause, then the dispatcher, admirably professional, said, "Copy unusual wildlife on scene. Officers will handle." Nina would have laughed if she weren't trembling. She ended the call and crouched lower beside the gap, talking to the girl, asking her name, whether anything hurt, whether she could wiggle her fingers. "I'm Tessa," the girl whispered. "My ankle hurts." "Okay, Tessa, I'm Nina. Help is coming. Don't pull, okay? Just little breaths." Tessa nodded and started crying again, quieter this time, more from exhaustion than panic. Nina slipped off her own fleece zip-up and reached it into the gap as far as she could, covering the child's shoulders and chest. The bobcat paced once toward them and made a low, rough sound. Nina looked up sharply. "You stay right there," she said, then immediately felt ridiculous talking to it. But the animal stopped, sat back on its haunches, and kept watching. Within minutes, the station lot filled with flashing lights. First Deputy Cole Harmon, then volunteer fire in a brush truck, then the ambulance. Dawn was fully breaking now, turning the highway shoulder pale gold, and the sudden crowd of boots and radios and engine noise felt unreal around the little pocket of cold metal and concrete where Tessa was trapped. Deputy Harmon took one look at the bobcat and actually halted mid-step. "Nina, why is there a bobcat next to Pump 3? Nina pointed at the ice machine gap without looking up. "Long story, helpful witness. Child's back here." That got everyone moving. The firefighters assessed the machine and quickly decided what Nina already knew. No safe manual pull. The unit had to be shifted forward or lifted slightly, and the anchor bolts might be seized. Fire Captain Jen Maddox crouched beside Nina and shone a light into the gap. "Tessa, I'm Captain Jen. We're going to get you out, okay? We're not going to yank you." Tessa made a small sound that could have been yes. Jen stood and started issuing orders in that clipped, controlled voice that makes chaos organize itself. "Kill power to the ice machine. Need maintenance cutoff or breaker. Grab cribbing, pry bars, and the small airbags. EMS stage warm blankets. Cole, keep that area clear and maybe do something about the cat." Cole looked over at the bobcat, which had retreated a little toward the diesel pump, but was still facing the ice machine. "As long as it stays there, I'm not making this worse." Nina, shivering in her t-shirt now, ran inside and killed the exterior breaker panel while another firefighter pulled the machine's plug line from the wall disconnect. When she came back out, the compressor hum stopped, and for the first time everyone could clearly hear Tessa's weak scratching on the metal. That sound changed the whole mood. No more curiosity, no more disbelief, just urgency. The fire crew slid inflatable lifting bags under one side of the machine base, while another pair worked the rusted anchor nuts with impact tools. The lot rang with metallic chatter. Tessa cried when the machine vibrated. Nina knelt back down at the gap, one hand reaching in to hold the little girl's fingers. "Look at me, Tessa. Keep looking at me. They're almost there." "Is that my cat?" Tessa whispered suddenly. Nina blinked. "Your cat?" Tessa's eyes moved weakly toward the lot. "Spots. He followed me." Nina looked over her shoulder at the bobcat and almost said no on reflex, but then she stopped. "Honey, that's not a house cat." Tessa frowned, confused and half frozen. "He comes by our trailer. Mama says don't feed him. I gave him turkey once." Deputy Harmon, overhearing, muttered, "Well, that explains some things." Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Familiarity, food conditioning, a child who recognized a wild visitor as Spots. None of it explained why the bobcat had stood in a gas station lot at dawn and fixed on the ice machine until someone checked. But it explained why Tessa, frightened and trapped in the dark, might have cried to the one creature she'd seen around home. And maybe the animal had followed her scent to the station. Maybe it had stayed because it heard her scratching. Maybe that was enough. "Ready lift," Captain Jen called. The crew inflated the airbags slowly. The machine rose an inch, then two, creaking against the wall. Another firefighter wedged cribbing blocks. A pry bar shifted the base just enough to widen the gap. "Tessa, we're coming in," Jen said. Firefighter Luis Romero, smaller framed, flexible, and blessed for once by cramped spaces, slid on his side into the widened opening with a pediatric blanket and a flashlight. "I've got her shoulders. Ankles caught on conduit bracket. Hold the lift. Hold." Nina held her breath so long her chest hurt. Okay, ankle-free, bringing her out. Luis backed out inch by inch, cradling Tessa against his chest. The little girl's face was gray with cold and streaked with dirt, but she was awake, and the second Nina saw her fully clear of the machine, she sat down hard on the concrete because her knees suddenly refused to work. EMS wrapped Tessa in heated blankets and moved her to the ambulance while Captain Jen checked Nina for shock and told her to breathe. Just breathe. Tessa had a badly sprained ankle, dehydration, mild hypothermia, and cuts on her hands, but she was alive and expected to recover. The dispatcher's update to responding units later would call it successful extrication. Nina would always remember it as the moment the scratching stopped, and the lot seemed to exhale. And through nearly all of it, the bobcat stayed. It moved around the edge of the lot as more people arrived, never coming too close, never fully leaving. It watched the machine, the firefighters, the ambulance doors. One volunteer finally asked, "Should we haze it off before more customers show up?" Deputy Harmon shook his head. "Not unless it approaches. Right now it's better behaved than half our morning traffic." When the ambulance doors closed and Tessa was loaded for the ride to Dry Creek Regional, the little girl lifted a blanket-wrapped hand and asked, drowsy and slurring, "Spots coming?" Nina leaned into the doorway and swallowed around the lump in her throat. "Spots is okay, baby. You just get warm." The ambulance pulled out with lights but no siren. The morning rush, delayed by all the emergency vehicles, began to creep back in around the edges. Pickups slowing at the pumps, curious locals craning their necks, the first school buses on the highway. Deputy Harmon took statements while fire crews secured the machine and tagged the area. The official timeline started to fill in. Tessa, 7 years old, had gone missing the previous evening from a trailer park a mile and a half away after wandering off while a family member slept on the couch. Searchers had canvassed the park and nearby roads through the night, but wind and traffic noise had made it impossible to hear her cries. She had likely followed the highway lights to Miller's, crawled behind the ice machine trying to retrieve a dropped toy or hide from the cold, and become wedged. Nina signed her statement with a hand that still shook. Cole flipped a notebook page and said, trying to sound neutral, "So, you only checked behind the machine because the bobcat kept staring at it." Nina looked across the lot. The bobcat stood near the far edge of the gravel, just past the air pump, body turned toward the scrub lot behind the diner. Sunrise lit the fur along its shoulders in bronze. It looked smaller in daylight than it had in the blue dawn, more animal and less apparition. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's why." Cole followed her gaze. "We're not putting that in the report exactly like that." Nina gave a tired half-laugh. "That sounds like a you problem." By 8 o'clock, the story had spread across Dry Creek. It traveled the way stories do in small towns, through dispatch radios, text chains, and breakfast counters. At the diner, someone called it a miracle. At the feed store, someone called it that same wildcat from the trailer park. By lunch, there were 3 versions involving the bobcat scratching on the station door, which Nina corrected every time she heard it. "No," she said. "It stood there and looked. That's what it did. It made me pay attention." Animal control came by later, mostly to advise the station owner on securing the side gap and documenting the wildlife sighting. A state wildlife officer visited the trailer park and confirmed reports of a bobcat, frequently seen near the drainage ditch behind the units, likely habituated to scraps or rodents attracted by trash. She reminded everyone, firmly, not to feed it. Nina agreed with all of that. A wild animal wasn't a mascot. It wasn't a pet. It was still a bobcat. But that didn't change what had happened. Tessa's mother came to the station 2 days later, exhausted and red-eyed, to thank Nina in person. She brought a foil pan of enchiladas and cried in the beverage aisle before she made it halfway through the story. Tessa, ankle-wrapped and riding in a borrowed wheelchair, clutched a stuffed cat from the hospital gift shop, and asked if Spots was outside. Nina crouched to her level. "Not today." Tessa nodded solemnly, then whispered, "He was scared too." Nina thought of the pacing, the fixed stare, the rough, low sounds in the dawn. "Yeah," she said softly, "I think maybe he was." For weeks after, Nina found herself glancing toward the side wall every dawn when she started coffee. The ice machine had been pulled and re-anchored properly, the gap screened off with heavy mesh, and the compressor serviced so it no longer rattled like a dying generator. The station went back to normal in all the visible ways: fuel deliveries, breakfast burritos, lottery arguments, mop buckets, sunrise through the glass. But she listened differently now. When a sound didn't fit, she checked it. When something outside looked wrong, she didn't wave it off as probably nothing. And every once in a while, usually just before full sunrise, when the lot was empty and the highway was between waves of traffic, she would see movement near the scrub behind the diner. A low, tawny shape slipping along the edge of the light, pausing just long enough to look toward the station before disappearing into the brush. Maybe it was the same bobcat. Maybe not. Nina never pretended certainty about wild things. Still, on the coldest mornings, when she stepped outside with the first trash bag and saw fresh paw prints crossing the lot near the pumps and curving once past the side wall where the ice machine stood, she would stop for a second under the canopy glow and feel that same mix of awe and humility all over again. Not because she believed the world had turned magical before dawn at a gas station off Highway 17, because a child had been trapped behind a machine while the grown-up world hummed, rattled, and looked the other way, and because one wild animal in the half-light refused to leave until somebody finally listened to the wrong sound in the right place.